The following video is an analysis of the television programme House of Cards. Footage from that programme will be used in order to illustrate parts of said analysis and will also be presented for critical dissection. This video will also spoil, well, technically it will spoil House of Cards, but it also won't spoil House of Cards. It definitely won't spoil House of Cards, but it will spoil House of Cards, but not that much of House of Cards. There's still plenty of House of Cards, but
it's me!
I am a big fan of the political drama. Not the politics per se, but the backroom dealings, the bitter rivalry, the backstabbing, the two-facedness. But then, the height of the tension comes when a grey man in a grey suit walks into a grey room and says, "I don't think Smythe's got long left," and walks out again. You see, I'm the kind of guy who sees that and goes, "Oh, that's Smythe fucked, innit?" And when Smythe is leaving number 10 for the last time in the next scene, I will turn to the person next to me and tell them I told you so, like I'm the reincarnation of Malcolm Tucker.
Somebody get me a fucking Fanta!
But I understand that it's not everyone's cup of tea. People need a little more excitement than Gary Oldman in a trench coat looking grim. But there was a success story in that genre in recent years that did seem to attract more eyes than usual, possibly thanks to its glossy Netflix sheen. House of Cards, for a while at least, looked like it was holding its own with the big boys like Breaking Bad or The Wire. At least it was in the bantamweight class of perennial favourites like Boardwalk Empire or The Americans. People were keen to find out the next great scheme of Frank Underwood and the ins and outs of the American political system. It was a little soap opera-y at times, but the intrigue was there to keep the audience hooked for the next season. And then, well, Kevin Spacey happened. The show attempted to struggle on manfully by boosting Frank's wife up to the top spot, but the wheels had already started to come off before Mr. Spacey was, let's say, far too frank with people he shouldn't have been. It was an unceremonious end to what was promising to be at least an interesting resolution. Perhaps the Underwood presidency would still have fallen at the last hurdle, but really, it could have gone either way. That last series could have been a classic capper to round everything out, or rubbish, we'll never really know, even if the plans for a Spacey-led Season 6 are ever unveiled. Scripts can be very different from what we end up getting. But what if I told you there was a way to get a better understanding of what the Underwood presidency could have turned into? What if I told you all this has happened before, and that time the main actor didn't turn out to be an alleged nonce? Alleged, all right, alleged. I know the allegations were dismissed, but the veracity of the claims isn't really what matters today, because it was just the claims themselves that got Kevin Spacey shafted from final season. So, look, we're not discussing that today, all right? Okay, maybe we're discussing something like it. Look, it's the original British version of the House of Cards from the 90s, all right? That's what we're doing today. Jesus, why am I getting the third degree here? Look, let's just put the topic to bed, all right? I'll need something else to interest a modern audience into this dry, politics-heavy BBC programme. Let's see. Oh, Deadpool! You kids like Deadpool, right? This guy's like Deadpool. Seriously. In fact, he does what Deadpool does much better than Deadpool. And I'm going to keep it very vague what exactly I'm referring to in that statement in order to string you along until the end of this video. You may think that's manipulative, but, well...
You might very well think that. You know I couldn't possibly comment.
Let's go on a journey into the mind of the man who would be Prime Minister, and how Francis Urquhart is one of the best realised television characters ever put to screen. Grab your bi-royal appointment biscuits and a copy of The Telegraph, and let's all be professional about this, eh? It's 1990, and the UK has never looked... no, wait, it still looks like that. Worse, if anything. Tory Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher has just left office. Don't count your chickens, mates, it's not over yet. Maggie may be gone, but the Blues still cling on to power, led by the guileless plodder Henry Collingridge. But waiting in the wings, though, is our, for want of a better word, protagonist, Francis Urquhart. Francis is an old hand in politics. He's the chief whip.
I put a bit of stick about it. I make 'em jump.
Basically, if anyone in the Tory party is being naughty, it should be Francis's job to kick them out. But of course, it's politics. Francis's actual job is to collect blackmail material, scare people senseless, and conduct dirty tricks, all for the good of the party, of course. He's got a squadron of lesser whips and minions acting as his eyes and ears in the house, and if a politician, red or blue, has done anything sketchy, Francis knows about it. Francis was hoping for a new job with even more power now that Maggie's been prized out of the top seat, but Henry and his chief political advisor Lord Bilsborough, don't laugh, these names are only going to get funnier, have decided Francis is perfectly fine where he is. Francis doesn't take too kindly to this news and puts into motion the downfall of Henry Collingridge and Lord Bilsborough. It helps that Collingridge is seen as a weak, ineffectual leader, but the enemy is supposed to be the other guys, you know, the communists. I mean, Labour. Sorry. Being around these people for any length of time can have something of a corrupting effect on you. Just a word to the wise. This is not the programme for people who think that Thatcherism was just a misunderstood rally against socialism. But in truth, this is more about politics in general. There are good people on the Tory side who genuinely, if naively, think they're doing the right thing. The issue is that our eyes-in character is Francis, who claims to not have any political leanings, but is secretly a maniac in disguise. By using a number of tricksy schemes, including using some henchmen in the press to start bad-mouthing Collingridge, and even setting up Henry's brother, the hapless pisshead Charlie, into an investment scandal, Francis gets the tide to turn against Henry pretty quickly. Soon, Henry is resigning in disgrace, but the party can't be leaderless. I mean, who would tell everyone what the political think tanks bought and paid for by big corporations said they should do? A leadership crisis emerges, and anyone who's anyone wants to sit on the throne as head boy, including plaid-speaking northerner Patrick Wharton and up-and-coming young buck Michael Samuels, but it's anyone's game. Francis, of course, does not seek leadership, but then his wife suggests it, and his mistress, and his fat American friend who runs all the media, and Henry Collingridge himself at one point. And I mean, if everyone's really keen on it, then who is Francis, ever the servant of the state, to say no? Francis throws his hat into the ring and sets about knocking out some of the lesser competitors and, as usual, uses scandals and blackmail to his advantage until it's down to just Francis, Patrick and Michael. Francis has cultivated this image of being the man in the middle. He doesn't stand for anything except for maintaining the status quo, meaning his support base is anyone who thinks Patrick's too rough and Michael's too young. You're probably thinking that the slugging match between Francis and his opponents is going to be the main driving force behind the home stretch, but actually, Francis thrives in this kind of situation. Patrick's been shagging about, so the threat of a tape of him shagging about cleanly takes Pat out of the running. And as for Michael, it's as simple as getting the papers to call him a communist. Francis has a clean run to leadership, and by the end, Francis Urquhart is on his way to Buckingham Palace to get sworn in as the United Kingdom's new Prime Minister. The people, seemingly, love him, and he's able to keep his own dirty work under wraps, and even his old enemies begrudgingly call him better than the alternative. But how does he do it? Francis lies, cheats, corrupts, blackmails, threatens and double-crosses with abandon. We see it all. Every way you can think of to bring down a respected political opponent crosses Francis' desk at one point, but people still think of him as their closest ally and confidant. How on earth does Francis not just survive, but thrive in the viper's nest? How do you actively campaign to backstab someone and still have them think of you as a noble, dear friend? Simple. Don't be the man holding the knife. Francis does his level best to make other people think that he doesn't really exist. He's
Just a backroom boy.
You'd be forgiven at times thinking that Francis was actually a civil servant, who are supposed to be unelected impartial administrators to the British government. But he's not. His blood is bluer than Napoleon. He shoots foxes and pheasants in his stately English manner. He listens to Wagner and reads Shakespeare. His name's bloody Urquhart.
No more buttered scones for me, mater. I'm off to play the grand piano.
This puts him firmly in the good old boys network. To this day, my beloved country has a problem with people with hyphenated last names being listened to far too much when their only claim to fame is that their daddy owns Kent, if you'll pardon my accent. As long as Francis mostly keeps his head down and doesn't cause a fuss, the man's already guaranteed a life of luxury plebs can only dream of. Francis is well aware of this, and would like to keep it that way, thank you very much, so he understands that if he wants to get something done, somebody else had better do it for him. The problem is that, at least at the start of House of Cards, Francis has made himself useful by making things quiet, i.e. quietly hushing up other MPs' indiscretions. For those of you without letters after your name, indiscretions means shagging about, or homosexuality, or communism. Francis has made himself indispensable as a cleaner. It's at least the reason why Collingridge and Billsborough don't give him that promotion they promise him. You can't be Home Secretary, Francis. You're too good at being a bastard. On the surface, Francis claims to be little more than an instrument of the party, a weapon to be wielded, rather than a person to be talked to, and when you make yourself inhuman, people are liable to start treating you like property. That's the thing, though. No one expects the kettle to start plotting their downfall, and they get really surprised when the kettle now has your job and has got your wife to leave you and release those pictures to the papers of you at that nightclub snorting cocaine. Cocaine is the lever Francis uses on one fellow, Roger O'Neill. Officially, Roger runs the advertising company that managed to scrape the Blues to victory in the Collingridge election, but the only reason Roger got the job in the first place is because Francis knew he could blackmail him. But Francis didn't start their relationship with a gun pointed at Roger's head. First he let him win the election. He allowed Roger to fly high, a success story. It was only then that Francis called Roger into his office. It was only then that Francis not only revealed he was well aware of Roger's habits, but that he also knew Roger couldn't help himself but pad his invoices to get more cash out of the government. Francis saw weakness and allowed Roger to dig himself deeper. From this point on, Roger becomes Francis's stooge in all but name. He threatens Francis's enemies. He technically pimps out his girlfriend in order for Francis to get more blackmail material on his opponents. And he helps Francis set up another of his schemes designed to unseat Henry Collingridge. It doesn't end well for Roger, and only a few people even question it, all because a weakness Francis was exploiting becomes public. Hang on, though. Roger may have been instrumental in the plan to remove Collingridge from power, but who's this other chap playing a role? He looks awfully familiar. Wait a minute. Yes, Francis isn't afraid to get his hands dirty, but it's all in the aid of getting someone else to take the fall. See, you don't need to blackmail someone for them to play a part in your plan. You just need to make other people think they're involved in the con instead of you. This is Charles Collingridge, brother of Henry. He's an embarrassment, a drunken old sot who might have some sort of learning disability. I mean, to me, he just seems to be a pisshead, but everyone talks about him like he's unable to put his trousers on in the morning, so I don't know.
Most families have someone like Charlie, someone who can't make it on their own.
Everyone knows Charlie is a daft old bugger, and Francis makes it clear early on that one of his duties is keeping Charlie out of the public eye. That is, until he can use Charlie in his plot to dethrone Henry. But Francis doesn't ask Charles if he wants to be involved in a shady investment scheme involving sensitive information only privy to members of Parliament. No, instead he pretends to be him, setting up a bank account in his name to accrue funds from investments that are seemingly tied to companies the government strikes deals with. Francis even sets up billing addresses for Charles to receive party literature, making it seem like he's getting tipped off by friends in the party about where to put his money. When this all comes out, Henry is put in the spotlight and framed for funneling information to his brother. Despite knowing it's impossible, despite knowing his brother is a feckless and silly chap, despite everything, this is what pushes Henry to resign. And all through this, Henry thanks Francis for being a stand-up guy. The line back to Francis is never traced back for Henry. Finally, Francis has Charlie spirited off to a hospital for political embarrassments, run by Francis's own henchmen. Francis is more than happy to ruin the lives of those who had the misfortune to fall into his line of fire, but he is capable of maintaining some friendships. Well, one friendship. At work, the closest thing he has to a true friend is Tim Stamper. Stamper is a rodent-like man who seems to be something of Francis's apprentice, the Count Dooku to his Emperor Palpatine. Stamper knows a lot of Francis's rhetoric.
Put some stick about, eh?
And the two share sly grins and schoolroom gossip about the fates of their colleagues. Stamper seems to be the stick that Francis likes to put about. Francis publicly claims to support Patrick Walton. This is likely a lie to not have everybody against him. He has a bit of a rant about the man early on and is perfectly happy risking ruining his marriage if it gets him out of the running for the top spot. It's ultimately hard to think of Francis as a man with friends. They're more like tools at his disposal or pieces to play, and for part of the series, he doesn't even seem to have an opponent. But behind every great man is a great woman, and behind every rat king, there's a... Away from the hustle and bustle of the houses, Francis retreats to his manor in Hampshire, where he entertains guests, broods in his study under a portrait of his hero Napoleon, and talks to his wife, Elizabeth. Except Elizabeth isn't an unknowing, clueless housewife vacuuming the carpet while her husband's taking scalps in Parliament. Elizabeth, I would say, is half of Francis. Francis, for all his scheming and plotting, seems to get half his ideas from Elizabeth. She's very like him in that way. She'll suggest a move here, point out a potential problem there. Francis divulges everything to Elizabeth, and Elizabeth fully supports her husband sticking knives in everyone's backs. Most relationships never get this close. She was fearless, and crazier than him. She was his queen, and God help anyone who dared disrespect his queen. Francis and Elizabeth plot over tea and biscuits, but sometimes Francis seems a little put out, a little wary. But whenever Francis finds himself wondering what to do, Elizabeth is always there trying to get him back on the right track. Francis loves quoting Shakespeare, and his wife does too, and the most quoted play in House of Cards is Macbeth, which is infamous for its portrayal of a dark prince murdering his way into becoming king, all while his wife whispers encouragement into his ear. Elizabeth is most likely framed as Lady Macbeth, or at least one of the witches that foretells Macbeth's future. There's a particular shot in episode 4 where we have Elizabeth in a house frock that's far from her usual finery, lit by a bonfire and holding a broomstick, all while Francis sits with a despondent, spiralling Roger O'Neill. This scene is then followed by Francis quoting Banquo from Macbeth.
If you can look into the seeds of time and say which grain will grow and which will not.
This particular line is Banquo questioning whether the witches can truly see the future and the ramifications of their power. This line, plus this imagery, suggests Francis might be questioning if he and his wife truly have all the answers. Is Francis maybe aware of his own fate, told to him by his wife? Shortly after this scene, Francis poisons Roger. So if the Urquharts can see the house of cards laid out before them, they seem determined to play it out to the last hand. If I may divert us from the macabre, earlier on, when Francis finds himself in discussion with a bright young reporter, who could be very useful in sneaking out information to the press, not only does Francis tell his wife that he just had this conversation with this reporter in his private rooms, Elizabeth suggests that Francis should start sleeping with her. It's not a kink thing, at least I don't think it is. When Elizabeth suggests this, Frances gives her an affectionate peck on the cheek. Anything for the plan, I suppose. All the other politicians are unfaithful. Elizabeth probably thinks she might as well get something out of it, like her husband's ascension to higher office. The only time Frances and Elizabeth seem to be at odds with each other is when there's a tiny hint, that Frances might have grown feelings for this reporter, something Frances swiftly squashes. We'll come back to this later. Frances, on the surface, seems confident, and I don't think Elizabeth is truly one step ahead as she appears. Frances, psychologically, seems to crave being given the go-ahead by someone to do something he has already resolved to do, and Elizabeth is the perfect delivery vessel for such affirmations. Frances seems to be aware he's going to run for Prime Minister long before people start pushing him in that direction, but it's Elizabeth who suggests he might be made for greater things, after being knocked back by Collingridge and Billsborough. To stretch a metaphor, perhaps Frances is Darth Vader to Elizabeth's Palpatine. Both effectively run the Empire, but Frances cuts down the rebels and chokes Imperial soldiers, while Elizabeth sits in the big spinny chair, whispering plans and guiding her minions in the shadows. But the rule of two is always in peril. Many wish to take on the mantle of the Sith for themselves. Inquiring minds turned against the decadence of the light side. No one stopping Lord Vader from setting up his own apprentice. That reporter I was talking about earlier, the one who winds up being the recipient of Frances's chief whip. Her name is Mattie Storrin, and by gum, she's a go-getter. Mattie starts the series working for the Tory-aligned newspaper The Chronicle, but she's one of these Lois Lane reporters, you know? She asks questions and follows leads. Naturally, she's not very popular with the paper's owners. Her snooping leads her to the doorstep of Frances Urquhart, who takes an interest in her when she shows she's capable of seeing through the lies and lines that Number 10 is putting out in regards to the strong and stable government of Henry Collingridge. This starts a number of little meetings between Mattie and Frances, where they discuss the skullduggery and backroom dealings of politics, an elderly experienced statesman coyly dealing out the tricks of the trade to a young, eager mind. Except that's not what happens. It's actually really hard to tell what exactly both parties are doing, by design. Take Frances, for example. Frances frequently gets Mattie to jump to conclusions, letting her fill in gaps in these stories of intrigue of her own opinions, or helping him find out who could be a potential foe for him down the line. He also manipulates her more than a few times to get her to push to print stories he wants in the paper, in order to sabotage his enemies. But when Mattie starts getting close to the truth, Frances tries to scare her off. Not in person, of course. He has Roger O'Neill smash up her car and throw a brick through a window. It would have been simpler just to cut Mattie off from the plotting. She's done her job, and Elizabeth is implying that this situation should be resolved, though what that means is kept vague. Instead, Frances continues their meetings and seems to show genuine concern for Mattie's well-being. Or does he? If Frances can keep their perceived master and apprentice relationship going, she's less likely to start putting Frances in the frame, even when it becomes clear the only person with means, motive and intelligence to put all these disparate plans together is Frances. This method certainly works, as Mattie blindly refuses to believe Frances is involved repeatedly until the evidence becomes irrefutable. On Mattie's side, something truly bizarre is happening. She's an intelligent, capable woman who correctly intuits a lot of the scheming that's going on without much prompting, though a little leading is certainly in play. But Mattie appears to have a thing for older men. A big thing.
I want to call you Daddy.
Oh, dear. Now, to be fair, this situation is a lot more complicated than it appears. Firstly, Mattie is the first person to make overtures, and she even calls him Daddy first. Frances seems surprised by this. No one's forced to do anything, and Mattie is of age. Still, really creepy, but hey, most politicians in the real world seem to have done much worse. Secondly, Francis's interpretation of Daddy as a phrase isn't exactly what you'd expect. At one point he says this.
Why should I yearn to be everybody's daddy?
Whew! Oh boy, there's a lot to unpack here. I think I should refrain from reading the comments on this video. But this statement from Frances is telling. This is about power for Frances more than anything, and power given willingly, not taken. To be that unquestioned, paternalistic overlord. People genuinely support Francis, even the public seems to prefer him to his opponents, at least after he's smeared them into the ground, because he's seemingly bland and at least isn't for the thing you're against. Mattie is the rawest expression of this relationship, and there's a possibility that she only starts it to, in her eyes, trick Francis into being more candid than he's already being. I think a valid interpretation of Mattie, at least early on, is that she goes into this situation thinking she can wrap Francis around her finger. Politicians, especially in the House of Cards universe, are sleazy, and is this old coffin dodger really going to turn down getting his leg over the fine young thing from the paper? But this does develop into genuine feelings, or at least a deep respect, and a belief that Francis, while a political mover and shaker, wouldn't orchestrate the downfall of every major political colleague of his for his own benefit or revenge. In the final moments of House of Cards, despite the evidence being laid bare for Mattie, she still tries to convince herself it's not true, even when confronting Francis. Francis goes stone-faced upon being accused of all the things he did, including the murder of Roger O'Neill. It's hard to tell what his reaction truly is, but to me, he seems betrayed. He told Matty to stop chasing the story, but she kept going. Francis says it's a matter of trust, and Matty's reaction is just as hard to gauge for different reasons. She starts saying his secret is safe, but is this out of fear? Does she really think of herself as Francis's apprentice? She even pulls the daddy card. But it doesn't work. Francis pushes Matty to her death, stating he just can't trust her. Her last word is daddy. Francis tries to spin it to himself that he had to do it. She was a risk. There was no true love there on his side. We are left to ponder the truth of that statement. We are left to ponder the truth of that statement. We. Is he looking at us? Throughout House of Cards, Francis has been making lengthy asides to us in the audience. If you're a fan of either classical theatre or modern comic book movies, this kind of activity shouldn't surprise you. But here it's being utilised not just to keep us aware of the plans and schemes going on through the character's head, but for a very different purpose. In fact, despite having Francis stop proceedings to have a chinwag with us, the potential expository use of this storytelling method is often ignored. We'll get the hint Francis is up to something, but then see his deception play out without elaboration. Even after his plot has succeeded, Francis is less likely to turn to us and explain what happened, but rather gloat or snipe at his recently defeated foe. Francis seems to confide in us, and even seems to treat our little tete-a-tetes as him teaching us the ropes of political moving and shaking, almost like we're his latest apprentice. Wait, hang on. If Dooku is Stamper and Matty is more of a Maul, I already screwed up the metaphor by confusing things with Elizabeth, so, we're a Sarge Ventress? God, I hope we're not Kylo Ren, that would be embarrassing. Anyway, Francis loves to throw us giddy little smirks while he's watching his schemes play out. In fact, he always seems faintly aware someone is always watching him. But this is a mechanic, right? A way to get us exposition and character motivation, because the world of politics is too complicated for our soft, sponge-like brains. But let's look at how Francis operates. He's depicted as a kind of super-intelligent chess master, being 30 steps ahead of everybody else, and even when things take a turn for the worst, a quick push of a building will sort everything out. He does display some emotions other than sinister pleasure and mild concern. Disregarding the possible interpretations of his relationship with Matty, he seems to get pretty genuinely angry with Roger when he starts cracking up and threatening to blow the whole conspiracy. But, again, just like with Matty, Francis unveiling potential real emotions only gets the person he's speaking to do what he wants. He wants to convince Matty to trust him. She tries, but he just decides she's too much of a liability. Thanks for playing, see your tape recorder in Series 2. Yelling at Roger is the only way to calm this frantic man down, and it gets Roger to Francis's house, where Francis can then poison the man away from prying eyes. It's possible these little outbursts could be calculated. They're just ways for people who have partially seen through the Urquhart glamour to get them to the places where Francis can deal with them. Perhaps it's even a way to throw these opponents off, to trick them into thinking there's some talking to Francis, there's some humanity in him, before he reveals there's nothing there but brutal pragmatism and self-absorption. And what if we, the viewers, play a part in that? Our observation, our one-sided conversations. Francis's talks to us are supposed to be more candid than they are to anybody else in the text, but that's because he's always on, and even tries to keep some secrets from us. He refuses to go into detail about the more carnal matters of his and Matty's affair, for one. This may sound like nonsense, and the former internal monologue as narrative device clearly makes much more sense as the simpler Occam's razor option, until you remember a key driving character trait of Francis Urquhart. Francis is intelligent. He knows what he wants and how to get it, but he never acts unless someone has implicitly given him the go-ahead to do so. He tricks his political enemies into agreeing to help scupper their own careers, and is so adept at it they thank him for the privilege. He's aware of both his potential attraction to and the usefulness of Matty Storin and his desire for higher office, but he waits for his wife to suggest these things to him, in much the same way he would do to others. And with Matty, well, he doesn't want to be daddy until someone says it's time to come back from the petrol station with smokes. A big theme of Francis's conversations with us is that our watching him is giving him the reason to do the things he's doing, using the bystander syndrome argument. Our lack of action is consent. Francis likes to tell us his justifications for his heinous dealings. Unseating Henry Collingridge was for the good of the party. Killing Roger O'Neill was a mercy for a sick dog. And then he becomes Prime Minister on the same day he kills Matty, and we get perhaps the most telling one-to-one for Francis we get. He's getting driven to the palace to get sworn in, and he's nervous. Just after he killed Matty, he told us very calmly what the press will say about Matty's death. But once we're in the car, he gets jumpy. He says he had to do it, says he had no choice. He could have chosen to believe Matty, but that wouldn't have got him Prime Minister. That would have got him a prison cell. He's usually so eloquent, so refined, the mastermind pulling the strings of his web to trap and devour his prey. But Matty is a failure of his. She got too close and asked the wrong questions. A liability no matter what she said. But then we hear the last words of his little speech to us.
You might very well think that. I could not possibly comment.
This has been his catchphrase. He's been using it all series to convince Matty the ideas he's putting into her head are her own, but now he's saying it to us. We are his new apprentice. The silent majority, except we're much more tame than Matty, because we just need to keep watching to make Francis's plan continue. As long as we continue to watch House of Cards, we are powerless to stop these events. And Francis is betting on that. We did this, you know. At least, that's what House of Cards is implying. By not standing in the way of terrible men, we allow greed and arrogance to cost the lives of innocents. The audience is supposed to be the British public. We act as a character in the world of House of Cards, just by our observation of it. The only time we get the slightest hint that the public is against Francis are in two spots. There's the fact the Tories get a reduced majority at the beginning of the show, but that's probably more Margaret Thatcher's fault than anyone actually in the programme, and there's this small group of protesters outside the conference in episode 2. Francis, while running for Prime Minister, actually seems to poll well, helped by his flunkies in the newspaper and the indiscretions of his opponents. He doesn't publicly stand for anything, which means if you think everyone else is too extreme, he's who you vote for. I suppose the enlightened centrist allows opportunists to weasel their way into great power, or some other grandiose political statement I'm definitely not qualified to make. But that's purely on the political side, and Francis isn't portrayed as much of a genuine political entity. He doesn't even seem to want to hold power. He just has to because everyone else is incompetent or presents a threat to him, cajoled by everyone else around him, usually for their own gain. It's his relationship across the fourth wall that makes House of Cards more than a political thriller. Before video games made us the guy who killed the Nazis or the guy who collected 47 power mangoes to defeat the evil Lord Bastard, this was the closest you got to being in the round outside of performance art. Francis knows we're watching. He's even putting on a little show, but he's still a character. He still has to justify his actions as part of the programme. He can't magically decide to act without characters in the programme giving him the nod, which is what makes Matty's death the confirmation. Here, he's looking to us to give him the okay, to understand he did what he had to do. Our complicity is vital for him to go on, to rule Great Britain, to bury the bodies. Francis was a product of his environment. He looks at Shakespeare and Napoleon and Wagner and sees himself as part of these great and terrible stories, but he can only carry on if nobody stops him. If you don't pull that DVD out of your machine, just as powerless as, well, a dead rat. But what does Francis do now that he's Prime Minister? Maybe he mellows out. Perhaps he starts doing social reforms and funding education and the Arts Council. Maybe the death of Matty brings him closer to his wife and he apologises to all those he wronged. Or maybe he forges a deal with Oberon, King of the Fae, to steal every English family's firstborn for 7 pence off the price of oil. You won't know that today, I'm afraid. I mean, unless you go out and watch the show yourself. For this was only the first part of a trilogy, and it will be next time we discover how it feels to play the king. Oh yeah, and by the way, the American version completely ruins this point. Basically, he turns to the camera and tells you to your face that you elected him, which, completely ruins the whole reason why Underwood should turn to the camera. Urquhart turns to the camera because he's tricking us as well as everybody else. Of course, he's not going to tell us that he's fucked us over. It's really... And that's in the good series of the American version as well. That he starts off doing that, completely ignoring that you might have any sort of intelligence at all. Just watch the English version, honestly. Watch the English version. It's just better. It treats you like an actual thinking human being. Just watch the English version. It's better. All right? Good? I'm glad we had this talk.